Hey guys, so this is video number 2 in our series. In number 1, we talked about how you go about setting up a strong validation process. So a lot of RTOs that I know have a process whereby they pick a number of units at random, and a compliance person or another trainer will sit down, validate those units, and then be like, yep, all good, cool, okay. That's not how validation is supposed to work. So first things first, you have to get your validation process right. So make sure you've got your structure right. And then what we need to look at is the steps that we actually go through when we're doing post validation. So just to give a bit of a description, I've got my words that I use, okay, and this is not the proper ASCII language, but I use post validation and pre validation when I'm describing it. Post validation is validation of a completed assessment tool, okay. Pre validation is validation of the assessment tool by itself as a standalone. So some people refer to this as moderation. Some people refer to either of them as moderation. For me, moderation is more like as once the assessment has been done, when we've got a group sitting around together, we're looking at the outcomes of our validation. Moderation may occur on the assessment tool as part of that natural process that comes out of the validation. I know that the language has changed a lot over the years, but that's just how we use it. Anyway, we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to keep moving forward. So post-validation, as I would have done in my previous video, I'm always doing it in batches. So I'm looking at anywhere from 3 to 5 students that completed the unit at around about the same time with the same trainer. Ideally, if you're doing any sort of classroom-based training, they've all come out of the same class. If it's work-based training, they've come from the same work site and they completed it around a very, very similar period. So basically the idea is to get students who have operated in the same environment with the same trainer and look at what the outcomes are, okay? Because I guarantee if you do this a batching method on 3 different trainers for the same unit, you're going to see totally different things happening depending on the quality of that trainer. So first things first is we go through theory, because when we're dealing with post-validation, theory comes first. I lay out my, let's say, 3 assessments, or I open up my 3 assessments in Accelerate or whatever online system I'm using. And so I will have it all open. I will have my marking guide open to question 1, and I will read marking guide question 1, and then I will read student answer 1, student answer 2, student 3's answer 1, right? So I read all of those in a row together to see whether or not, there's any sort of plagiarism happening. So first things first is, are we plagiarizing from the marking guide itself? Because if I'm seeing verbatim the types of answers, now again, this depends very much on the type of question. Just ignore this if all you do is multi-choice at an AQF 1-2 level. But AQF 3-4-5, you better be using proper questions. It is very, very hard to do a quality assessment at an AQF 3 level with nothing but multiple choice assessments. I'm happy to have that argument, but that's my position at this point in time as it stands. So I read through the marking guide answer and I read through all the students' answers. So with a question of, let's say the question is, name 3 pieces of PPE that you should be using on a civil construction site, okay? And so the marking guide answer is students should wear, a hard hat, gloves, and a high-vis shirt, okay? And realistically, you should probably have 5 or 6 in there in your marking guide. And then student answer number 1 is hard hat, hard hat, high-vis shirt, shoes, steel-toe boots, right? So hard hat, high-vis, steel-toe boots. And then student 2 is hard hat, high-vis shirt, steel-toe boots. And then student number 3 is hard hat, high-vis shirt, steel-toe boots. I'm going to be like, that's a bit weird that all 3 have come up with the exact same order and the exact same 3 pieces. And then when I go to the next trainer, I'm going to see hard hat, high-vis shirt, steel-toe boots. Steel-toe boots, high-vis shirt, long sleeve shirt, or I'm going to see gloves, hard hat, steel-toe boots, right? They're all like the same answers that I'm seeing in the marking guide, but I'm seeing the students showing them in different orders, and they're showing like a variety of different responses. I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable that what I'm seeing is I'm seeing an authentic student response, right? So I do this for probably at least the first 6 or 7 questions. I go through in very long, like very, very detail, just to really look at like the language that's being used from the students. So things that I've seen in the past are like verbatim from the marking guide, clear case of plagiarism. I've seen completely out of line with the marking guide, like the responses are correct, but they don't align to the marking guide at all, but all students in that particular class have somehow managed to come up with the same exact response. Not plagiarism of the marking guide, but very clear and strong indication that potentially the assessment is actually not being done as an individual assessment, but that the trainer is having a discussion in class and is writing the answers up on the board, and the students are then writing down the answers based on the class discussion. Now, there is place for that in like formative assessments, but when we are talking about summative assessments where we are getting authentic and current evidence of the student's knowledge and understanding of the unit, no, that's not okay. If you are supporting your group by like having big discussions about these sorts of things, you might have those discussions, but then the students ultimately have to come up with the responses themselves, okay? So that's the kind of things that I'm looking for when I'm doing my post-validation of my theory assessments, because what I want to be looking for is I really do want to have I want to be in a comfortable place that I'm like, yeah, the students have actually read the materials, they've understood the knowledge that sits behind the unit. Quite often there's going to be like a lot of different answers that fall outside of the marking guide because, between industry language and students' experiences and things like that, there is almost no way that you can have a marking guide that's going to have every possible response. But I want to see that variety and that individualism when it comes to the theory, because if all my students are doing is parroting language from the assessor, or they're parroting language from a marking guide, then it's a pretty strong indication that there is actually not understanding occurring. All that's happening is that mirroring is occurring. And look, there are some AQF 1 and 2 qualifications where like mirroring and parroting, like that's really what we're looking for in the students, like in relationship to understanding and things like that. But when it comes to AQF 3, 4, we need them to understand, we need them to interpret, we need to be able to describe and explain that information to a variety of different like clients. They need to be able to explain it up to management. They need to be able to explain it down to new employees coming into the business. So it's important that it's authentic, and it's, authenticity is something that is probably overlooked a lot more in post-validation than it should be. But unless you're doing group assessments and unless you're doing that batching method, it's very, very hard to actually identify whether or not that authenticity is actually occurring. As per usual, I've gone over time. So post-validation part 2 is going to be coming up in the next video. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good day. This is Lauren from Anawaya.